Brazil oil industry shakeup could be devastating for its economy following the ousting of the CEO of Brazil's state-controlled oil groups by President Bolsonaro earlier this week. Bolsonaro.
Did I say that okay?
Earlier this week, experts fear what greater intervention might do to the country. Following the change in leadership, some stocks plummeted, losing 20% of their value Monday, around $13 billion. This also had a negative effect on Brazil's currency, which decreased in value by 2%. What are your thoughts on what's going on in Brazil?
So in 1964, the United States funded and financed a coup, and that military regime was around until 1985. It was almost 2 decades before they had an election, an elected president. Bolsonaro happens to have been a member of the military regime back then. So it is a very slippery slope in a country that has been devastated by the virus to try and swing the pendulum back to another military regime. And that is why 4 members of the board of directors of Petrobras stepped down in protest when he instated a general who knows nothing about energy as its CEO. So these are not the kind of things that you want to read. It's why they call emerging economies, emerging markets, emerging, because they don't do things that developed economies would. But Brazil is a big damn economy. It's the biggest economy in Latin America, and you don't want to see this happen at all. You don't want nationalism. You don't want these types of trends to start because they can be contagious from one country to another. We've seen this in the past. And again, we were talking about the economic reliance on China. So you start lining up the dominoes, and this is hopefully somebody in the CIA is wise to what's happening down there, because this is not the way we want for it to go. In 1964, the United States was financing the coup. Who knows who's behind what's happening now? But this is not a good direction.
64, was it JFK or was it Lyndon who funded the coup? Lyndon funded the coup.
And Kissinger came out, a few years afterwards, Kissinger came out and said, we know that they were killing off dissidents. It wasn't anything like Chile, where they killed a ton of people. But there were many, many dissidents. Speaking of suppressing free speech, bad things happen. And they tortured their own people. They killed their own people. They exiled. If you were exiled, you had that was a good verdict. But you don't want to see these developments.
So what's next? If this continues, what happens to Brazil? Who do they become? Are they like the next Venezuela, like Adam said yesterday?
That is a risk. You don't want to see that.
I know you have a soft spot for South America. You lived in Venezuela. You know, you got a great Spanish accent. I'd love to hear more Spanish on the show. We got some Colombians and Venezuelans and Mexicans in the house. Not that Mexicans, but Brazil's the powerhouse in South America, right? I mean, for sure, not even a question. And you know, being here in South Florida, we have an influx of Venezuelans.
Yes, you do.
Bananas. There's Brazilians here. Argentina's a mess. I guess just give me your economic synopsis on what's happening in South America, how that affects us here in America, because we have our own issues to freaking deal with. And the last part of that is, how big on the shit show level is Brazil right now? Like,
well,
overall economic South America.
This is kind of the first shot across the bow. So the person who used to run Petrobras, who was ousted, was a University of Chicago educated economist who believed in free markets. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the direction that South America was taking, looking at the example of Venezuela and saying, we don't want to go there. So this is not something that you want to see, but at the root is income inequality and terrible income inequality.
In the favelas, it's insane in Brazil.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, yes. And that is where a lot of the COVID deaths occurred.
Wow.
So we're seeing similar situations play out in Peru, Mexico, and in the United States. Income inequality is an economic phenomenon that will come back and kill capitalism.
So I know 3 things about this guy, Bolsonaro. And obviously we're learning more about him. I know number 1, they called him the Brazilian Trump. Mm-hmm. Right? He would refuse to wear a mask, mm-hmm. and then he got COVID. Mm-hmm. And then you see all these images of like burning the Amazon in Brazil and him sort of not giving an F of what's going on there. So he seems just completely
Narcissistic?
yeah, I don't know the word.
Self-centered?
Is that what's your take on this guy Bolsonaro?
I think that power corrupts absolutely. And we're seeing an example of that. But again, you have to remember his roots. His roots were in that military regime
Gotcha.
that we do not want to see Brazil go back to, because you don't want to have economies that are susceptible to becoming future allies of China. And it all, I mean, I'm sorry, but all roads lead back to Beijing.
Wow.
And it's an economic matter. And you care who butters your bread. That's it.
So is China using the playbook that U.S. has used for decades, and now
Bingo.
they're doing
Ding,
it
ding, ding,
themselves?
ding,
So
ding,
they're
ding, ding,
they're
ding.
they're internally funding coups, and they're taking over. I mean, you got that's an interesting
Meddling
dynamic.
in elections, you're
Ooh,
saying?
they are just, but they're saying, hey, we learned it from you. Thank you. You know, we learned it from you. You taught us how to do this, and we think it's a great strategy. We're just going to do it better than you because
During the Industrial Revolution in the United States, we trashed our environment in order to build out our companies, in order to build out our industrial sector. And what have they done? They've trashed their economy, and they've built out their industrial sector.
Trash their environment in China.
Environment. Sorry. Yes.